Now, time to say a very good morning and a welcome right now to the opening show of the week, Mr. William Clouston, leader of the Social Democratic Party. We do so just as Keir Starmer has notified everyone that he's going to be self-isolating again after coming into contact with someone who has tested positive for COVID-19. He says, I have no symptoms and I'll be working from home until next Monday. So that, by my reckoning, is the third time that Keir Starmer has been self-isolated because he has come into contact with somebody who had COVID. They seem to get it a lot more than everybody else, these politicians, don't they? Unbelievable. 0344 499 1000. William, a very good morning to you.
Morning, great to be back, thank you.
Yes, no, thank you very much indeed on this auspicious day for your party, 40th anniversary. I mean, it's one of those dates that not a lot of people listening perhaps won't remember as well as you and I do, but it was quite a massive sea change in the political world, wasn't it, at the time? And it struck me when I was looking at the pictures this morning of the launch of the SDP 40 years ago, what substantial figures those four people were. Shirley Williams, you know, and the others. Absolutely extraordinary kind of individuals, very smart, very clever. Tell us a bit about it and why it happened.
Well, it is a massive day for us as well to celebrate it. We take our history very seriously and we'll be celebrating up and down the country. It is the 40th anniversary of the issuing of the Limehouse Declaration, which was the founding document of the SDP. What was it? Well, it was basically four very, very senior Labour Party politicians that decided that politics wasn't working in this country and decided to try and make it better. They left and set up the SDP. And the SDP was, anyone old enough to remember in the 80s, it was the biggest challenge to the two-party setup in British political history. I'm sad to say it wasn't successful in the 80s in changing the system, but we continue to fight for a change and argue for it.
Yes, indeed. And the four people who were involved, I mean, Roy Jenkins, as I said, Shirley Williams, David Owen and Bill Rogers, I think it was. They were all big beasts of the Labour Party in a way. I mean, Bill Rogers maybe slightly to a lesser extent, but they were all very well thought of individuals. And it struck me that we don't have those kinds of politicians really in any great numbers anymore.
Yeah, I think there has been a decline in the quality of frontline politicians, and I don't think there's any doubt about that. They were very, very big figures. Jenkins, former Home Secretary and Chancellor and Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. George Brown, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party in the 60s, joined. David Owen, a major figure, former Foreign Secretary, and so on. So, yeah, I mean, huge figures. I think that the decline in the quality of politicians generally is not just on the Labour side. I think the Tories, if you want to look at, you know, a decent cabinet, have a look. I mean, I didn't agree with them at the time, but if you want to have a look at a good quality cabinet, look at the photograph of Mrs. Thatcher's first cabinet in '79. I would calculate about 12 or 13, 14 of those members of the cabinet would have been worthy prime ministers on quality. So yeah, there has been a decline, and there are many reasons for that. But the basic message that the SDP tried to get across was actually, you know, highly subversive. Really, it was quite revolutionary, which is that we should get away from vested interests in politics. You know, I think many of the problems that we identified back 40 years ago are still around. I mean, you've still got a vested interest basis to politics. You've still got the Labour Party. Every time it gets in, it just looks after the public sector. I know people might argue about this now, but broadly speaking, the Tories look after the business interests. Yeah. It doesn't seem to occur to them that there's a balance between those things and you can govern the interests of the whole country.
Mm. Well, as you say, there is a slight wrinkle, I suppose, to that summation of the way things are, which I agree with, by the way. I don't think you're wrong, because what they do apparently now is look after the business interests that they want to look after, and they've now thrown to the wolves the business interests that they don't care about. And I suppose that's where it's different, because that, in a way, is more insidious than it was.
Yeah, they do seem incapable of seeing the bigger whole. But that's, as I say, that's just a sort of pathology in politics generally. And it doesn't occur to people that, you know, very, very successful societies offer a blend of market and state and have, you know, a strong and capable state, but you know, value free enterprise and prize it because that's where the wealth is generated. And again, the balance, neither of the duopoly parties seem to get the balance right. The Lib Dems now are actually a joke as a party. I mean, declining rapidly. I think they're in real trouble. Yeah. When we launched the sort of resurgence in the SDP, I said a couple of years ago, my aim would be to replace them within 10 years. And we're very realistic. And I think that that's achievable given the way they are. I mean, I think they're not even celebrating today, the Lib Dems. They've completely lost the plot.
Yes, they have. Well, they don't really know what they stand for. I mean, last time I heard Ed Davey speak, he was talking about going around the country to ask people what he should stand for. You know, which in my view is kind of the wrong way round. If you're a politician, surely you should stand for something and try to convince other people that they should believe in you.
Yeah, I mean, just to get onto the Lib Dems, it's very interesting. So that they technically have real problems. You won't get anywhere in politics unless you believe in something, unless you have a clear idea of what your foundational system is. And the Lib Dems now have 3 separate ideas. It's not a big party anymore. It's only got about 4 or 5% of the vote.
Right.
And within that 4 or 5% of the vote, they're representing 3 things. You have these sort of proper liberals, classical liberals, Gladstonian free trade types, Orange Book. I mean, that's fine. That's a fine tradition. It's not my politics, but it's a fine tradition. But, you know, frankly, Mike, there are more of those type of liberals in the Tory party than there are in the Lib Dems. And then you've got the sort of wokey types like Layla Moran. Now, I can't see any difference between the woke attitude that they have and the woke attitudes that get in the Labour Party. I mean, they may as well, those people basically should just go away and join the Labour Party.
Maybe they should just form a new party called the Woke Party.
Well, they've got it. It's the Labour Party, I suppose. I mean, and the Tories aren't very good.
I mean, without wishing to get too theoretical here, I mean, we also have 2 leaders of the 2 main parties who don't apparently believe in much either. I mean, I've no idea what Keir Starmer actually believes in because he sort of blows with the prevailing wind. And Boris Johnson, we keep hearing is a libertarian, but everything that he does would appear to suggest that that's not true.
I think, Mike, they are actually, all of them, this is a problem, all of them are just different types of liberals, and they're all pretty woke, Mike. There is a major, misalignment between what the public thinks out there in the hinterland and what parliamentarians think. Again, one of the things that the SDP tried to shift 40 years ago was this misalignment between what, you know, the people in Parliament and out there in the country. And you saw this. I mean, I saw lots of interviews post 2016 that you did about Brexit.
Yeah.
You know, and the basic problem was that the politicians in that institution, in Parliament, were way out of alignment with what people thought in the country. The mainstream moderate position was to leave the EU, but the Parliament was chock-a-block full of liberals of various kinds. Now, if you want to change that, you've got to change the voting system because, you know, there are challenger parties, there are people with a different view, but this rigged system that we have basically locks us out. And until you change that, you won't get a parliament that in any way reflects the divisions in society.
But the difficulty with any other form of electoral system, aside from first past the post, is that they also all have their own problems, don't they? Because in the end, what you can end up with is a kind of Scottish situation where you either become like a one-party state where nobody really has much power at all, or you get a sort of constant stream of various coalitions being made.
Well, you do. I don't think there's no perfection under the sun, Mike, but, you know, frankly, I mean, remember, don't pretend that Labour and the Tories aren't coalitions anyway. I mean, they're massive, massive coalitions. From in the Labour Party, you've got, you know, Marxists right through to sort of social democrats with socialists in the middle, and you've got a lot of people. And the Tories are the same. You've got you've got 1 or 2 traditional social and moral conservatives left in there, but most of them are liberals. And you've got a broad range. The only difference is that basically the coalition is done by those 2 big parties, and then they put the coalition platform to the public. I mean, we would argue that why don't people vote honestly for what they want, get that representation in Parliament, and then do the coalition? I think that's a clearer, more transparent way of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly up in Scotland at one point when the SNP had to form a coalition with the Green Party, it then turned out that an awful lot of policy became greener as a result. Fair enough, I suppose you could argue that that's the case. However, not that many people voted for the Green Party, and they had a disproportionate, I would say, influence on government policy just because they were the ones that had done the deal with the government.
Yeah, no, I take that point. I think that's fair. I mean, I don't think Scottish politics is a very apt comparison anyway, because I think it is frankly distorted by the SNP's separatism, and that dominates.
There's some very strange things going up there as well, which we will probably address later in the week. It's probably too complex to get into now, but there's some very odd questions being asked and not very many answers coming back.
There are. I mean, but as I say, the whole Scottish politics is distorted by this SNP project, and I think it's the utter disgrace. The SNP can start campaigning for another referendum during a pandemic. I mean, what are they thinking of?
Well, I know, it's absolutely extraordinary. And also, by kind of misappropriating British government funds and not spending them properly, which is apparently what's been going on, and then claiming they don't get enough money. I mean, it's quite disingenuous, if not worse. But let's talk a little bit about where we are now as well, William, because obviously we'll come back to the two-party system and how difficult it is to break through that if you are a different party. But looking at the landscape of the next few weeks, it doesn't look like we're going to be moving anywhere anytime soon. I'm looking at some figures from Public Health England this week, the executive summary of the COVID-19 and National Influenza Report. They say that in week 2, the case numbers started to go down, infection rates started to go down. Now, we're told all the time that lockdown and its effects do not really kick in for at least 3 to 4 weeks. So if they're, seeing infection rates going down in the second week of January, that would tend to suggest, would it not, that they were coming down anyway?
There's never been a very clear link empirically between the time that lockdowns are put on and the peak of the viral curves. Frankly, it's quite a weak link, actually. I mean, in the very first wave in March, actually, the peak was prior to the lockdown and so on. So these things are quite weak. Frankly, I think the point on lockdown resistance politically, you've got to keep on making the case.
Yep.
We've never asked for very much as a party. We've only asked that the government should try and look at the costs of suppression measures, to try and quantify them, to try and even acknowledge that there are some costs. That's been our argument all along. I think the point is moot because I don't think they're going to move on any of this stuff. I think what is encouraging, if you look at Saturday's vaccination total, I mean, that's very impressive, nearly 500,000.
Yeah.
That I think basically, hopefully, literally in a matter of weeks, we've got to be looking at unlocking and getting on.
Well, you would think so, but you would like to think that you'd then be hearing that sort of noise being made by the government, rather than this kind of consistent scaremongering. Boris Johnson at it again on Friday, talking about how this new variant might actually be more deadly and might kill more people than the last one. Turns out there was no scientific basis for that whatsoever.
Yeah, that they find out, don't they, a few weeks later. But the government have been from the start pretty keen. I think it's basically, Mike, it's the reason why they haven't been willing to look at any of the broader costs and the long-term costs, because they're just hammering a single message, and anything that helps that single message, they will hammer. So they'll use it. But I mean, if you stand back and look at some of the data, some of the things they're saying don't make actually a great deal of sense. They're talking about the South African strain. What is it? 80 people tested positive for that in the UK. Well, you've got over 1 million people with COVID currently in the UK. So I mean, frankly, that is a drop in the ocean. Whatever the differences are, I mean, I'm not underplaying it, but I think basically any message that the government can use to frighten people and to continue the policy, they will. But
I think continuing not to do anything and continuing to keep schools closed, continuing to damage young minds, continuing to frustrate people's ability to make a living. And when I was looking at some other figures, and I'm always asking for these, about the numbers of people who get COVID, go into hospital and then get released because they don't actually die, apparently out of 1,000 people over 60 who got COVID and were admitted to hospital, basically 10 would die under the old former, first wave of the virus.
Yeah.
Now, apparently it's 13. That's still an incredibly low number out of 1,000.
Yeah, not a huge amount of data either. I mean, as I say, I think that we're just I'm hoping we're in a situation now where thankfully this country is doing rather well on the vaccinations. And apart from Israel, it's basically it's the biggest total of any large country. And again, you've got to feel sorry, actually, frankly, for the Europeans who've been totally hampered by their own bureaucracy and seem incapable of rolling out a vaccine across the various member states with any efficiency. And all those people that said that things were better with a large centralized bureaucracy, I think have been proved wrong. It's actually nation states have done rather better, but that's a separate point.
Yes, no, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, the one thing that Britain has been very successful at is the rollout of the vaccination, and that can only be applauded. But by the same token, as you say, I mean, people are now calling, Robert Halfon this morning calling for a roadmap out of this. I've been calling for that for the last 2 weeks at minimum. You know, Julia Hartley-Brewer and I have been banging this particular drum probably for the best part of the last 3 months, and only now are actual MPs starting to make noises about it.
You've got to keep the pressure up, and certainly the criticism of people that have been sceptical or even questioned the measures from the start is a disgrace in a democracy. I thought we were allowed to ask questions here. I thought we were.
Well, I'm sorry, it's not it's not about whether they allow us. It's about our right to do so.
Yeah, exactly. That's precisely my point. And, you know, I think you should, I mean, unless we have some scrutiny, unless you have some people questioning things, basically the government can do what it likes. So, no, it's a public duty to question, actually. I think, and as I say, we haven't asked from the start, we actually haven't asked for very much. I think all of this is going to be a matter for the subsequent public inquiry. And I'm sad to say, actually, I think a lot of the things that we were saying about the long-term effects are going to bear out, but, you know, it'll be past the event by then.
Right. And finally, William, just on the kind of two-party system, there's talk in America, I don't know whether it will happen, that Donald Trump is thinking about forming his own party, which may be called the Patriot Party. If he's got such a big base, could that be, say, an example of how to bust the two-party system? Because he could take an awful lot of votes away from the Republicans.
I'm fairly skeptical about his ability to do that. I'm not saying his base isn't very significant and strong. I think it is. But I think, you know, across the Anglosphere, we tend to have two-party systems for some reason. It's interesting. You know, Canada has had a change recently, but basically the states, have one. We have one. Ireland has one. Australia, New Zealand basically have them. I think the voting system is connected to it because if you can get people in Parliament, you've got a chance. Actually, and then people can at least convene and put different ideas forward. I mean, I've always said that the worst number of political parties in a country is one, and the second worst is two.
Yes, well, I think we can probably agree on that one as well. William, good to talk to you. Thank you. Happy birthday to the SDP. 40 years old today. William Clouston, their leader of the Social Democratic Party.